This week, co-founder and research director of Savage Security, Adrian Sanabria, joins us for an interview. Then, Adrian's going to stick around, and we're going to do a topic segment titled, Penetration Testing is Dead, Long Live Penetration Testing. In the security news this week, Microsoft's going to build its own custom Linux operating system. Another flaw found in Drupal. Facebook has been in the news a lot lately, and according to a job posting, they are looking for hardware engineers, which is kind of interesting. All kinds of stuff going on with Chrome. Chrome extensions are hacked. Also, Microsoft is making a Chrome extension. What happened with Microsoft? Like, they're drunk this week, clearly. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Welcome. Does Larry have an introduction? Hi, everyone. This is Paul Asador, and I guess I'm introducing...
Apparently, I no longer do. Wow, and I look short.
So, I accidentally landed in New England and stumbled my way to the G-Unit studio.
That's pretty much how I envisioned it happening. Job. Carlos, save the show, please.
Yes, somebody's got to do it.
Cannot be saved.
Well, it's good to have you back, Carlos. Jeff, welcome. Nice to have you in studio.
It's great to be here, Paul. Try to stay awake for the whole episode.
Yes. We've been in studio dropping his phone incessantly. Welcome, Jack.
What? Where? Oh, hey! I'm in the studio with you guys. That's kind of cool.
NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com. In 2017, an increasing number of companies reported they did not have effective insider threat detection methods. LogRhythm's UEBA solutions enable you to detect and neutralize user-based threats in real time, while built-in scenario and behavior-based analytics empower you to expose insider threats, compromised accounts, and privilege misuse. Visit LogRhythm.com to learn how their UEBA solutions can help you expand visibility and enhance detection capabilities.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who likes it thick and long all day. I'm talking about his cigar, of course. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly episode. Sorry,
And that is
my cigar.
And that's not nearly the thickest or the longest one you've shown me. Or a combination of thereof.
Wow. There is Doug White actually gave me the world's largest cigar that I've seen, potentially, ever. I mean, it's just massive.
And you watch a lot of stuff on the internet.
And I'll smoke it on a Thursday when I get into the office, and by the time we start the show, I'll probably still be smoking it, and I'll take pictures as I go. So this is episode 556. It is, in fact, April 19th, 2018. Larry and I are in G-Unit Studios. Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
What's going on?
Same stuff, different day.
Excellent.
Never a dull moment.
On the lines via Skype. Hey, not Kevin's with us with the background of Boston. Well, it's like a window. And then on the other side of the window, there's another building with more windows. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Paul. It's actually an infinite series of windows that goes on for probably ever. That's what Boston's really known for.
A lot of operating systems in Boston, apparently. So,
an infinite series of windows.
Hopefully,
it's like Inception.
Hopefully, Jason Wood will be joining us a little later on. Our very special guest for tonight is on, but we are going to do an announcement first. Make sure that you register for our webcast with Distill Networks. The official title is 9 Ways to Protect Your Business from Bad Bots. And they're going to talk about their bad bot report. We're going to front end that, John Strand and I, and talk about this alphabet soup that I think the security vendor community wants to reference in order for you to protect your web applications. And it really is alphabet soup. So we'll help you kind of understand what that alphabet soup is, how it can help you or not, the gaps that it leaves. Then we'll talk about bad bots. We may even start off with, like, what's a bot and why do you care as it pertains to web application security. And now, having gotten to know Distill Networks very well, you do care. Believe me, you care. You're going to want to attend this webcast. securityweekly.com/Distill Networks. Please go there and register today. It's going to be fantastic. Now, I would like to introduce, for the first segment and the second segment, we have Adrian Sanabria from Savage Security on the show tonight, reporting live from the RSA 2018 conference. Adrian, welcome to the show this evening.
Thank you.
Well, I guess
it's
still.
You can see it behind me.
Yes, it's.
Oh my God, it's so busy.
There's people at our. It doesn't look very crowded this year, Adrian.
Yeah, this is the third floor. I picked a floor that wouldn't be too crowded on purpose.
Awesome. So, Adrian, before we talk about RSA, let's kind of jump into your interview, and we want to get to know you a little better, and our listeners do as well. So, how did you get your start in information security?
Well, if you want to get me, if you want to get to know me better, it's Sanabria. I usually don't harp on that, but your last name is Asadorian, so I feel like I should throw that out there.
My last name is Asadorian. You did pronounce it correctly. I did not pronounce your last name correctly.
Sanabria.
And I never give people a hard time for that. Usually I just let it go, but if it's like a 5-minute interview with the local TV news, like that's different. We're going to get to know each other here, so I figured I'd let you know.
What you're saying,
this is important for other people to know too.
Well, what you're saying is we're special, is really.
Yes.
In like a special way, we're special.
I care enough to correct you.
There you go. Adrian Sanabria, right. How did you get your start in information security? I apologize for that, by the way.
Yeah, no problem. Actually, it was kind of a slow move into it. I started my career, honestly, the way I learned how to, learn computers, learn networks and things like that is when I first got broadband back in the late 90s, I decided to set up my own websites, my own email. I registered a domain. I ran my own email server and web server off my home network, off my 1.5 megabit massive ADSL connection to the interwebs, and just ran that myself for a long time. And when I got into my first, what I consider my career gig, which was at a large payment processor, I was on the IT side, but almost from day one, I was doing security stuff. So I remember I almost got canned from that job 2 weeks in. I ended up there for over 8 years, but almost got canned 2 weeks in. And that's because Code Red came out. We got hit pretty hard, and somebody asked me, hey, figure out all the NT4 servers that we have, thinking that I would physically go back into the server room, log into each box manually, and check and see if IIS is running on these NT4 servers or what it's running. Because I don't know if you guys remember Code Red.
I do.
But it seems like we went a long time without big worms that just came in and just tore stuff up like WannaCry and NotPetya did last year. But
so I have trivia.
Yeah.
I have trivia questions about Code Red. You want to take a little diversion, Adrian?
Sure.
Do you know who was one of the initial discoverers of the Code Red worm?
No.
He went on to, I believe, write and found a company around a vulnerability scanner.
Oh, would that be what's his last name? Mike EI, the EI founder?
Mark Mayfrey. Yes, Mark Mayfrey. We'll give you partial credit for that, Adrian.
I knew the name of the company. I knew who you were talking about. His name was not queued up in my brain.
So, Adrian, why did they call it the Code Red worm?
I'm going to be terrible at this trivia. It was also called NIMDA, wasn't it? Wasn't that the same one that had both names?
NIMDA. So I should know this because one of our now you're asking me trivia questions, Adrian.
Oh,
NIMDA is admin spelled backwards, and didn't NIMDA take advantage of the hole that was left by Code Red?
Oh yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
yes.
That was a follow up, like 2 months later.
Right.
That's why I conflate them together.
So Code Red was named after.
No, I don't know.
Oh, it was an energy.
Was it the game?
No, it was an energy drink. Mountain Dew Code Red.
Okay. Is Mountain Dew Code Red? Is that old?
It is
I'm
old. Yeah, I don't think I think they do still make it in certain markets. I think it's popular. So, the exploit or the vulnerability that Code Red exploited. Do you remember what that was?
I remember it was an IIS.
Yes.
I don't remember specifically what portion of IIS.
It was in the extension called ISAPI.
ISAPI and ISAPI filter.
Yes.
Yeah, they were responsible for a lot of bad shit.
Absolutely. Sorry. So continue now that we've had our nostalgic trivia moment.
Yeah, so going back into log into all the Windows NT4 systems to figure out which ones had IIS installed.
Yeah, so clearly, I mean, and this is, I guess evidence to myself that I kind of have this hacker mindset, maybe I'm just lazy. I don't know what to attribute it to, but, I was definitely not going to go back there and log into each box. So I actually had a license for a scanner called Advanced Administrative Tools. I don't know if you remember this. AA Tools. I think I recall spending like $45 on it way back then. And, I decided I'm just going to scan for it. So I go around, I tell all the main people in IT, all the system administrators that I'm going to scan, the server subnet. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay. And this one guy, the Sun admin, he's fine with it, whatever. I launched a scan. I probably should have had the forethought to only scan port 80 and 443, something like that. But I just launched a common port scan. And, of course, included in that is SSH. And it hits this guy's Sun servers, and he freaks out. Immediately goes to management. Is like, he's trying to hack into my stuff, and it's your basic, like a TCP Connect scan or something like that. And he's freaking out. And if not for my manager, putting his foot down and saying, look, he found a more efficient way to do this by scanning, that's all that's happened here. He saved my job, but for years I was labeled a cowboy after that.
What's really, really funny, Adrian? I too was labeled a cowboy around that same time, and I was on the other side. I was a Sun Solaris administrator, but I was also the security guy, and I would scan the Solaris systems. And apparently, you just need to try a little harder because you could crash a lot of Solaris services if you scanned hard enough or differently enough. So we should go back in time and tell that guy, like, hey, dude, you're lucky. Like, we didn't crash all of your stuff, because scanning Solaris in that time would definitely crash a ton of stuff. Well, maybe not a ton, but particular services for sadmin D, for example, NTP. There were flaws that in I know from experience, a regular scan would crash.
Yeah. No, I was not a fan of Sun or Seashell.
Yes, I was. Yeah, I was a fan for a while. I actually liked working with Solaris, so I differ with you there, Adrian. I was a fan. And it sounds like we were in similar kind of circles and roles back in the early 2000s.
So bringing that, I didn't really connect that, but I did pretty much all the incident response from almost, again, like 2 or 3 weeks in, like definitely in my first month. I got handed an incident to work. And so I was doing security stuff from the first month, even though I didn't formally move over into security until I was in that job for 4 years.
And then, so after that, where did you go, Adrian?
So after that, I got tired of seeing the same problems that I couldn't solve, year after year after year, and I was wearing way too many hats. I was redoing RACF on a mainframe. At the same time, I was still chief incident handler. I'm managing SIMs. I'm wearing way too many hats. And I realized it was time to find the next thing. And I wanted to see other people's networks and the different mistakes and what they make. So I decided to go into consulting, and I joined a consulting company where I was a PCI QSA and a pen tester. And to get that job, I really wanted to pen test. I was really, really excited about that. So they asked me, hey, do you know PCI? Of course, I'm coming from a payment company, a payment processor. So, of course, I've had, PCI just forced down my throat. at that point. We've done it from year one on. So I'm very familiar with PCI, and I really want the job. So, of course, I say, yeah, I know PCI. I'm willing to be a QSA. And then, of course, I end up just, nothing but PCI work to do, QSA work to do.
So not so much pen testing as it was PCI QSA work, assessments for PCI.
Right, and I still got to do a lot of pen testing, and in some cases, in the same week for the same client, I was doing both the pen test and the QSA work that was more efficient.
That's kind of weird, though, right? Shouldn't it be? Different people?
There's no requirement. There's no requirement for separation of duties there. I checked.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And then
talk about emerging markets.
So was it after that you decided, like, woke up one day and said, I want to be an analyst?
No, actually, I went back to the enterprise after that briefly. And that's maybe a story for a different time, not on record with some drinks. But
those are the best kind of stories.
For a year.
So you went to work for an enterprise for a year, and we'll get that story over. I remember it was Chris Breton that would teach a class and say, and I have a story about that, but that's reserved for like tequila after class maybe.
It's one of those.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so, I was looking for my next thing, and I saw two people on Twitter describing something that sounded really interesting. I didn't know what the job was, but the description was intriguing. So I got in touch with both of them. One was Eve Adams, Hacker Huntress, was that's what she was doing back then, and the other one was Wendy Nather, and they're both. It turns out they're both describing the same job, and eventually I found out I was talking to two different people about the same gig.
Gotcha.
And so that was just the coincidence there, because they were describing it in different ways.
Yeah, sure. So Wendy at the time worked for 451, and Eve was probably recruiting for 451. Is that the situation?
Yeah. Yep. And Wendy hired me in there, and man, that was like a new career, And it was cool going in, because they actually have you do writing tests. You have to write two of the industry analyst style reports that you do. And I got in there, and 451 is really heavy on the business and the finance side, much more so than some of the other firms. So, I learned all the VC terms, the private equity terms, investor terminology. I didn't know what a Series A was when going in there. So, I had to learn all these things. And it was fantastic. I enjoyed it. I pestered the crap out of financial analysts, asking them, how do you find stuff on a S1 filing or an 8K or a 10K, 10Q, whatever. How do you read this press release? What are they actually saying? Totally different language.
Now, Adrian, for the audience out there, like, if you're an analyst working for, at the time you worked for 451, there are obviously a lot of analyst firms out there today. For those in the security community, like, what is the role of analysts as it relates to our information security field today? What do they do?
Make sense of all this crap.
That's really a pretty good answer.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what that guy's doing either.
He's stretching.
He's trolling me.
Yeah. So in more detail, Adrian, what do they do aside from make sense of all the crap that happens at RSA? What roles do an analyst play in our field today?
It was it's an exciting role. If you like to blog about the industry, if and looking for my replacement, I remember when I told Scott Crawford I was going to leave, he said, "That's fine. Find your replacement, please." And I started looking for people, and I realized it's really easy to find someone who's good for this kind of work, because they're already doing it. They're already writing about the industry. They're already analyzing the industry. They just don't know that they need this job yet, basically. So I found Fernando Montenegro to replace me, and seems like he's been loving the job. And you get to influence the industry some. I'm not going to say like we're this huge influence, but you talk to vendors a lot. You talk to enterprises a lot. You get a lot of insight on what's going on. You kind of try and predict and push where the industry is going to go. I know some people say they like to predict. I hate predicting. I'm too opinionated for that. So I just say what I feel like needs to be happening or what's wrong. So I'll just call stuff out. I'm very blunt like
Adrian,
that.
I want to ask you on the vendor side. When I was once a product marketing manager, it was one of the aspects of my job that, and I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, I didn't get a lot of training about how to interact with analysts, what their role was, what their expectations of vendors, what types of information that they wanted. I was kind of like thrown to the fire, and I learned by working with my peers and basically just like, yeah, we have an analyst briefing. I'm like, that's cool. Like, what do we do in analyst briefings, right?
Yeah.
And so there I was on the phone.
Not like a sales call.
Yeah, and exactly. So what's different about if you work for a vendor today or you're an analyst today? Like, what happens in those calls with analysts and vendors today?
Right, and it is a little bit different at 451 than other places. I'm just gonna
get comfortable. Get comfortable. I'm making them.
The jacket.
I'm making them hot. Talking about analyst briefings, he's getting sweaty.
Yeah. So, oh man, it just gets me hot. Just I miss those briefings. I miss them so much.
So what? Now we really want to know what happens in those briefings, Adrian.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's fast and furious. You're doing a ton of them. When you're at an event like this, you know, like some of these industry analysts are having at least 30 meetings with or briefings with vendors this week. So the vendor mindset is, I need coverage. You know, I need some validation from a third party.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's one thing for a vendor to say, we're amazing, we do X, Y, and Z, but they really want an independent party to say some of those things, to validate, hey, this is a real company, we exist, we have a product, the product exists, we have customers, you know, this analyst has talked to some of our customers, you know, so just market validation is a big piece of it. And generally, and this is one thing I didn't realize early on, is with some analyst firms, the expectation is if you talk to a vendor, you're going to write about that vendor. Like, it's just a given, like the fact that you accepted the talk. And with me, that was not at all my expectation. Yeah, I didn't realize that early on.
Yeah, you had to like them, basically.
Right. Yeah, and 451 is a lot more forgiving there, where you know they're kind of like, you know, for 80% of it, you know, you figure out like what do you want to cover, who do you want to talk to, what do you want to write about. You know, the analyst is the product. So, and the downside of that is for a company like that, when Javad left, when I left, when Wendy left, a certain number of customers are going to leave, you know, because they're there for that analyst point of view, because the analyst is the product. But I did write about some of them. You know, a lot of the vendors I'm meeting with, you know, sometimes they're completely outside my space. They insist on having a meeting. And I think, sure, maybe I'll learn something, you know, that's interesting. You know, so I take a lot of briefings just to understand what's going on, you know, what vendors are doing. And honestly, the more that you talk to, the better the view you get of the whole industry. And that's one of the coolest things about being an analyst, is you have the luxury to just kind of look at the big picture, look at the industry from all these different point of views and form your own opinion. And for me, it was a lot of fun doing that. It was, I describe it as a luxury, you know, for someone who wanted to understand the industry more, where it's going, you know, why do these products suck and these products don't suck? You know, what are the market forces that cause companies like Symantec, you know, to stop innovating all of a sudden? You know, why do these acquisitions never get, you know, oftentimes, you know, just go to die at companies? And you understand, you learn that over time, why that happens. You know, some of it can be stopped, some of it can't.
Adrian, how did you, like, what was your shit detector like? Like, how do you know if a vendor's telling the truth? How do you know if you're doing a briefing with a security vendor if they actually solve a problem for their customers?
It's really tough. You know, sometimes it's, you have to understand who you get on the phone, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, are they just regurgitating something that somebody else wrote?
Yeah.
So you start asking, you start by asking questions. If you can get them to give you a demo, you know, a lot of times, so I'll give you one example, and this isn't necessarily bullshit, but just communication can be so difficult in this industry. I was on the phone with a vendor. It's not really sensitive to say who they are, because it's kind of a good story. So I'll go ahead and say it was Risk IQ.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and and we're like, I remember saying, we were on Skype, and I said, guys, we're 62 minutes in, and I have no idea what you do. You know, like, you've described to me like the problem statement, the problem that you solve, but I don't understand if you're selling a box that I put in a rack in a data center, or is it a SaaS service, or is it threat intelligence? Like, it could have been any of those things, you know. And I learned early on to start asking the right questions early on. Like, do you have an architecture slide? You know, because that's very important for the context of this talk. And when you're selling to a customer, you're not going to show the architecture slide right up front. But when you're talking to an analyst, you know, I feel strongly that's important context to have. You know, are we talking about a physical box? You know, is it Zscaler, sit in the cloud type of thing? Is it, you know, is it a SaaS service?
Adrian, I just want to underscore that point for our hosts and our audience. I think you communicated that to me maybe at DerbyCon last year when we were talking, and I really took that to heart because it was one of the things I struggle with when we evaluate sponsors for activities we were going to do for our sponsors. I was in the same boat as Adrian. You know, we'd be 30, 60 minutes into a brief because we do briefings with a lot of companies as well, and I'm like, so, like, what is it? And then Adrian made me have this aha moment. I'm like, oh yeah, like, we're not an end customer, we're an analyst. Like, we need to know, is it an appliance? Is it in the cloud? Is it an agent? Is it not an agent? Is it passive? Like, what? Help me put it in context first. And even if you're not an analyst, Adrian, I kind of believe that if you're a customer, you kind of want to know that early on as well. Like, tell me the problem. Tell me how, like, deployment-wise, what does it look like? And then go on with your spiel. And that, with the rest of that information they'll disseminate to you, you can put it in context in your brain, because most of us are technical and have a technical background, much like Adrian, and can really kind of grok that if we kind of just change the ordering of some of these questions. So, Adrian, thank you for that. And to our listeners, really pay attention to what Adrian just said, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, and you don't want to be 62 minutes in and realize, oh, these guys haven't even bought me a steak dinner, and this is not something I can use.
Right.
You know, at least, you know, give me something for my time. But no, it was a good lesson for me, and it was a good lesson for them. You know, and I particularly like to talk to startups because they're more. I find that they listen better to advice and to stuff like that. Because, you know, I made that comment for Risk IQ. Talked to them 8 months later, and they nailed it in 5 minutes.
Yep.
You know, so that was so rewarding to me that
so
I was
wait,
like, oh, they listened. They actually listened, took my advice, and
yeah,
but
that's a great.
So I stopped them 5 minutes in, and I said, and I congratulated them. I was like, thank you for working on this.
But that's a great point. If you're working for a security vendor and you're on the call with an analyst will also give you advice that a lot of times you should probably listen to and take to. Hopefully, if they're good analysts, right, they'll give it's a two-way street, right? They're sharing their point of view on the problem, and the analyst should also share advice with the security vendor.
So it's something you have to get over real quick if you're an analyst, you know. And again, to your point that you keep making, I think it's important to get over if you're just talking to a vendor looking to buy a product. Ask any questions you have, you know, because I have talked to other analysts and sit on the same briefings with other analysts from other firms, and this is just an ego thing, maybe a psychological thing. Where you don't want to be the dumbest guy in the room or gal in the room, you know. So and I've noticed it gets worse as time goes on. And if you've ever given a talk, you might notice this too, where, you know, you ask if anybody has questions and nobody wants to talk. You know, so what I'll do is like, if I'm giving a talk, I'll plan an icebreaker in the room to ask a pseudo dumb question, you know, just so other people feel like it's okay to ask. But, you know, I remember early on when I was an analyst, I didn't understand what east, west, and north, south meant in terms of networks, you know. And so I had to ask that question, you know, and I felt totally fine asking that question. I got that, you know, it was something that was common enough that they didn't feel like they needed to define it for me.
Right.
But I've never really been deep into networking. Like that's if I have a weak point, that's where it is. I was never a network admin. You know, I was a DBA, I was a sysadmin, other things, but this north, south, east, west stuff, I had no idea what they're talking about. So I had to ask them to explain that. And there's so many of those, you know, because I probably talked to, over the 4 years I was there, 400 or 500 vendors at least. And, even a couple of years in, I'm still asking questions, terms that they feel are common enough. They don't have to define it or explain it to me. They just throw out there. I have to stop them and ask them, you're losing me here.
Yeah.
What are you talking? So you've got to be, and so many people don't want to interrupt, don't want to sound dumb, that they just let it go on to fruition. And you talk to them afterwards and they have no clue what just happened. They just wasted that whole hour because they didn't have they weren't willing to stop them and ask the question.
The sales team here at Security Weekly, account management, partner success, operations, all sit in on the most of the briefing calls, and that's probably their greatest challenge. Is it's not so much a technical thing as much as it is just like comprehending the lingo, how everyone uses this terminology. Sometimes vendors, I think, create their own terminology or use terminology in different ways, and it makes it very confusing. And so that, I think, is another great point. When people outside of our field come in and start to assist with these calls and collect information, I mean, we're large enough now where I don't do a lot of the initial or some of the initial screening calls. And I've had to really spend a lot of time with the team to help them understand, like, it's not even like a technical thing. Like, we're not talking about fields in a TCP header, right? We're just talking about, like, what Adrian's is a great example, like north, south, east, west. Like, we'll get off a call. That's a great example. And, like, Tori and Partner Success, like, what the heck were they talking about when they were? Are we like doing mapping? Like, what are we? And so that's a great example.
And I found further, like with East West, like the first way it was explained to me is north south is ingress egress, to the internet from the internet, and East West is just internal traffic. And then I come to talk to some other people, and I find there's different definitions of that. Some people use East-West to be data center to non-data center, so like server subnets to user subnets and vice versa specifically, not just internal traffic as a whole. So user subnet to user subnet wouldn't be East-West to some people.
Was that one of your greatest challenges as an analyst, was kind of just understanding the lingo, the terminology, the setting for all of that?
Every day. Every day. Like you say, sometimes they make up their own terms, and they've been pitching their own product and their own marketing so long that they don't understand that other people don't understand those terms. Like, I hate to, I won't name and shame, but there was a big company that I felt like most of their salespeople didn't understand what they were selling, what the product was or did.
Sure.
And I remember having 4 or 5 conversations. It wasn't until I got an engineer on the phone that I could really finally understand what the product did. Because every time the salespeople would explain it, I'm like, you're describing an IDS or an IPS to me. That's what you're describing. And they'd say, nope, we were told it in certain terms, it is not an IDS IPS. If anybody asked that, we were told to say, no, it's not that. And then they'd describe it again, and they describe an IDS IPS to me.
Right.
And we're at an impasse here. You're going to have to find somebody else for me to talk to so I can understand what you're actually selling.
Do you find a lot of it, Adrian, from an analyst perspective, but also a customer perspective, is that it depends on who you're talking to in the organization? And I feel like I was a good ways into my career in information security before I even understood enough to be able to ask the vendor for a particular person in a role to answer my question, right? Because there's product marketing people, there's product management people, there's sales engineers, there's actual research engineers, there's engineers that are building the product. Like, how do you recommend our audience help navigate the vendors? Because a lot of times people will say, well, I need to know this thing. I'm like, you need to talk to the product manager from that company to get that answer. And that's just based on me learning over the years. Like, can we distill it down for our audience today and give them some tips?
I mean, a good vendor should be able to send you who you need.
Yeah.
They should be able to pull whoever they need into that. That's really their job. I mean, you can learn their jobs and learn who to ask for, but even from one company to the next, sales engineers might not have the same roles, even though they have the same titles. So even that's not going to be, a foolproof way of approaching it.
Yeah, and you don't always want to talk to the developers of the product. which is why I learned actually working at Tenable what a product manager actually does. And I was like, oh, a lot of times, like, you want to talk to a product. Like, if you want to talk about features, maybe what features are in development, what features are coming down the road, why you're implementing certain features, you want to talk to someone in product management. That's the person that can help you the best. Right. You know, if you want to talk about their position in the market, what problems they're solving, how they're solving them, you might want to talk to someone in product marketing might be a better fit for that. And that just some of the things I've learned over the years as well. And I'm sure it was a mixture when you were on analyst briefings, Adrian.
Well, I did talk to a lot of startups. So
yeah,
in a lot of those cases, those roles didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you maybe had one person in marketing, and that's who you talked to, or you were talking to the founders and the execs, yep. Which I found a lot more interesting. You know, those conversations were a lot more interesting because you could discuss anything.
Yes.
You know, and you'd never hit that point where they're like, oh, we'll have to schedule another call with, you know, Bob, Patricia, and Tim, you know,
yes.
and round up some more people. And man, I would get on the phone with the big companies, and you know, you'd have 8 people on the phone. They're all interrupting each other, like they're all trying to answer the same questions, and it's a mess.
And what ends up happening in my experience in that situation, big company, 8 people on the phone, same question, different answer from all 8 people. Which that's challenging.
Yeah.
And that's, yep. Well, it's a challenging for an organization once you've grown to a certain size to keep that messaging consistent across the entire organization.
I've even gotten calls after calls where somebody who was on that call said, that shit Ted was talking about, that was bullshit. It doesn't work like that at all.
I, too, have had very similar experiences.
So one thing I just wanted to note, you mentioned vendors making up their own terms.
Mm.
You know, so I just wanted to touch on that real quick. You know, that I noticed that, you know, it's kind of a dilemma when you're in marketing. That you want to differentiate yourself. You know, and when you're in marketing, what you have to work with are words. So that's where a lot of that comes from. Is, you know, yes, the thing that makes the most sense to say, you know, that's going to turn on the light bulb for the customer the quickest, is also the thing that's going to make you sound the most boring or the most like your competitors. You know, so you've got this, like, you know, this dilemma that they have. You know, we want to sound unique and exciting, but at the same time, we want people to understand what the heck we're talking about. You know, so that's where you run into a lot of that.
No, and that's a fantastic assessment of basically the messaging that you're hearing in security today. I'm sure you've seen a lot of it at RSA. Is that attempt to differentiate can either clearly make you seem like you're the category leader, which is very rare. More often than not, it's just going to confuse the consumer because you have no idea what they're talking about.
So can I throw out an example?
Yeah, let's do it.
Continuous.
Oh, boy.
One that you're familiar with.
I am very...
What does continuous mean?
Exactly.
It means continuous.
Continuation of what?
Continuously what?
Yes. What are
continuous monitoring.
Larry said that.
If you know Paul and his work history, you'll get. I'm trolling a bit.
You are trolling. Thanks for that, Adrian.
And I do know Paul's work history.
Yes, and everyone in the security community knows it as well. And
you've been continuously employed in this.
Well, but what happens is you create a term or more kind of more marketing and business speak is a point of view on the problem, and you're trying to communicate that to the market, and then that's an effort essentially to differentiate yourself from others in your category. But then what happens is, as was the case with continuous monitoring, one of the problems is that your competitors also say, well, they're saying that they can do this thing they're calling continuous monitoring. Well, we can do that too and talk about these features that also implement that. And then your other competitor goes, well, now our other 2 competitors are talking about that too, so we need to be talking about it. And we do it in this different way. And then when you go assess that category in the market, you're really confused because everyone's saying they're doing X, Y, Z. And you're like, but they all do it differently. So which one is best? And I'm sure you read into that in not just continuous monitoring, Adrian, but other areas as well.
Yeah, so just runaway one-upmanship. You know, like Wendy likes to say, what comes after next gen?
Yes, exactly.
Next gen.
Next gen.
Yes.
And what I came up with and what I say is what you want to be is just continuous next gen.
Yes.
You're always the next gen.
You're always the next
I
generation.
almost just spit bourbon all over my computer with that. Almost.
My job is done here.
So,
Not quite.
From the analyst perspective, what do analysts get wrong? What are some cautionary tales about if you're in the security community today,
Right.
you're working for a place, and you're hearing what the analysts are saying? What are some kind of things that they might get wrong, or ways to interpret what they're saying that might be not so helpful that you can avoid?
How to turn on your bullshit detector for analysts?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so I was actually on a panel in 2016. Forget his name now, but he's from Mach 37, a cybersecurity accelerator out of the Virginia, D.C. area.
Was it Bob?
And
no, 2016.
no, Rick.
Rick.
I think
Okay.
Is that right, Rick?
It could have been Rick. There was Bob. We interviewed Bob on the show, and I can't.
No, it was definitely Rick.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's coming back. But he had me. He had Rick Holland from who was at Forrester at the time. Pete Lindstrom, who I think is still at IDC, on this panel. Nobody from Gartner was on the panel. I don't know if that was an oversight or just
Yeah,
But,
on purpose oversight.
it was about do analysts ruin the industry or are they hurting the industry more than they're helping? And kind of the focus of that was, if the purpose of an analyst firm is to make sense of this, one of the things we run into a lot is they try and force it into products or companies into buckets, just because that bucket's already there, because they don't want to have 1,000 buckets. We've already decided we're only going to have 12 buckets. We're going to limit it to 12 buckets here. So sorry, you have to go in bucket number 11. No, I don't belong in bucket number 11. The vendor says, no, get in there, get in bucket 11.
Mm-hmm.
And this has gone to the point. So what happens? I've seen vendors change their products to match the perception of what they do, or to make it easier for analysts to put them into those buckets.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, think about that for a minute. Just to make something, just because something's hard to explain, they're going to change it. They're going to stop doing that. They'll actually pivot the product or the just because people aren't getting it. I mean, maybe it's the best product in the world. Maybe it is the silver bullet, but people don't get it. They don't understand it. It doesn't fit in an analyst bucket. So, and it kills me, because sometimes I see these great products and they just get abandoned because they're not easily explained, or maybe they're just not doing a good job explaining it. Or because an analyst is giving a bunch of shit and putting them in the wrong place.
Or just not putting them anywhere, right? I mean, what we're talking about is category.
We don't have a bucket for you.
Category creation. We don't have a bucket for your category. Now, that could be maybe not effective at solving a problem, but it could be really awesome at solving a problem. It could be that you're creating a service where people can get in their own cars and pick you up and take you somewhere else. There was no category for that. And in fact, a lot of really big investors didn't invest in Uber, but Uber is one of the shining examples in technology today of creating their own category. And then came along Lyft, and then the taxi cab services also started following along. But Uber created that category.
Well, there is a category. It's called Other.
Yeah, but that's what Adrian is describing, right? As newer startups come on board, analyst firms may say, well, you don't fit into any of our categories, and we're not going to create a new category for you. And there's a whole lot of reasons, maybe over tequila, that that doesn't happen. And they may say, as Adrian said, well, we'll put you in this other category. And they're like, well, that's not really us. But if we add a couple of features or change our product, we could be in that category. And that rarely works out, if never. That doesn't work. And I think that's an example of where analysts could have a negative effect on our industry, Adrian.
Yeah. And Gartner is the 800-pound gorilla there. Mm-hmm. And I mean, vendors come to me and tell me it's night and day difference for our sales when we're in a magic quadrant.
Sure.
So if you're in a market where that magic quadrant doesn't exist, I mean, you've only got so much funding, that you've raised, so much runway to grow this company, to build up these sales.
Yep.
You can either, lose the company, let it go down, or you can pivot, put yourself in one of those nice magic quadrant buckets, and continue to grow. So it's it's not a great position to be in. It's not a great decision, an ideal decision to have to make. But they're businesses, so that's what happens a lot of the time.
Adrian, you're at RSA right now. What startups and what technologies or categories have you observed in the past week or so that have really impressed you?
Impressed me?
Says the curmudgeon. Impressed me? I'm a curmudgeon. Nothing impresses me anymore.
That I've seen here, honestly, I haven't gone around. I mean, I have been on the expo floor some. What really strikes me, honestly, is how many problems we haven't solved. One of the biggest categories I see, and I'm not sure exactly what they're calling them at this point. I'm sure they have some fancy different name for them, but it's basically critical control number one, which is asset management, right?
Yeah.
So a ton of startups here are just doing asset discovery and management. So something you could use Nmap for, but it's an unsolved problem. Companies don't know how many assets they have. They don't know how secure they are, where they are, what the firmware version is, if they've got default credentials on them. So really, we're seeing a lot of startups that are just taking that problem, where you could start with Nmap and building things on top of it. Like, okay, we're doing the IoT version, so we're really good at recognizing IoT. I don't know how often you guys use Nmap, but it's still terrible at guessing what it's scanning.
Yeah.
It still doesn't know the difference between my Amazon Echo is running Linux, yes, but it's not a Linux box, right? It still thinks that's the same as my lab server running Debian. It still can't tell the difference between those two things, even though it's got the Amazon MAC address. Like, we know how to look up a MAC address. So I guess it's a tough problem. I feel like we just haven't put enough work into that. And this is, I can't believe that in 2018 we're trying to figure out what's on our networks.
More comments on that? I mean, certainly, I think Adrian's right.
Yeah, no, it's funny. For In Guardians, we do a weekly, C-level newsletter for things they should be concerned about for the week. And the last two newsletters that I've written, both of them have been concerned around inventory management, and asset management, and figure out what the hell you don't know about what you don't know, which is terrifying.
Well, yeah, and as Adrian's got a background in pen testing. We're going to talk about that in the next segment. And I think one of the things that you probably discover is a finding on every single pen test, or there is a finding in what system or software is that on, and the customer says, "Well,
oh shit, I didn't know about that.
I didn't know about that." Right? Like, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
When you're
I thought we turned that off years ago.
Yeah.
Oh,
exactly.
We just set that up for a POC.
Yep.
Yeah. That was supposed to be temporary. It's become temporarily permanent, or permanently temporary. Either way.
Yeah.
So, is there a theme or a trend at RSA this year? I know it's kind of a lame question, but I've seen a lot of messaging around IoT, and I know we're going to talk about some Microsoft announcements that I think are very interesting. But what's kind of the general theme or trend for this year's conference?
On the political side, diversity is a big thing. So they had that RSA conference. I don't know if you saw that, where somebody at the last minute set up kind of a conference that was, and it's far from the first time that this has happened. Almost every year now, like somebody has a reason to be angry at RSA and start another conference. But I think it's good. I think it's good to have the feedback, to criticism in the form of a competing conference. I think is healthy, and so I was actually involved in a diversity panel that was started at 7 a.m. on Wednesday, which was a little rough. So that was kind of a theme. One of the keynote speakers, Monica Lewinsky, said, hey, why am I the only female speaker here? Don't you guys have any women in your industry? And they came up with more female speakers, but that's definitely been a focus here. On the InfoSec side of things, I think the only positive trend that I'm taking away from this is that we are seeing vendors tackle some of the fundamentals that have been abandoned and forgotten. You know, we still don't know how to keep data safe and secure, because attaching controls to data makes it really hard to manage. And I mentioned before, asset inventory management is there are a ton of startups doing that. I'm really glad they're doing that. You know, it's kind of a facepalm moment that we're just now you know, have the industry focusing on that, but at least it's happening.
Oh no! What happened? That was weird. It was
Sorry,
like it paused. That's okay.
I had a call come in and it paused.
Auto answered.
I'm using my phone, so sorry.
No worries.
We thought you lost her,
negative
and that went well.
Yeah, I came right back. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So the negative trend I'm seeing is, and I think this is really highlighted. I like to watch the Innovation Sandbox stuff, which I don't know if you guys have seen any of those, but they put them all up on YouTube, and it's basically like Shark Tank.
Yep.
You have 3 minutes to pitch your product, and there's a loud buzzer, or they cut off your mic. Like, they're really rude about it. Like once your time is done, you're done. And you know, I've seen cases where clearly they probably had 5 to 7 slides left. Like, they were way behind. They didn't practice or talk enough. And we were watching one of these, and we are just kind of standing outside, doing like our own real-time Mystery Science Theater 3000 thing, where we were just trashing whatever they were talking about.
Oh no!
Like we you know, as stuff came up, and one of them just kind of emphasized the trend, this negative trend that I'm seeing, which, you know, it was drawing out a diagram piece by piece, you know, starting like a lot of diagrams do. With a lot of products, you have some kind of sensor that gathers input, you know, say EDR, for example. This was not an EDR product, but, you know, it's gathering information about what's going on in the endpoint. And then you move over, and it's, you know, there's some kind of engine that's going to decide, okay, I found something bad, you know, and that's the magic engine, right? Like, that's where all the machine learning and the AI is going on. And then out of the magic box, you know, something else happens here. Like, it should be alerts, like the magic box has figured out everything, and you're safe and secure. But in this particular case, it was like humans, like showed humans, you know, downstream from the magic box. And we were like, clearly it's not that magic if you've got to have a bunch of analysts, like still figure out the noise coming out of the magic box. Yeah, and that's something I see over and over and over again. You know, more and more vendors have managed services as part of it, you know, because, you know, the product is tough to get up and running. It's tough to maintain. Companies don't have the extra staff, you know, to manage the extra data coming out of these products. So alert fatigue is still very much a big problem that the industry is trying to handle. And right now it's doing it by throwing people at it.
Yeah.
And that's not a good solution.
No, certainly not. Certainly not.
That's the negative trend is throwing junior analysts straight out of you know, high school, college, whatever, interns at solving the security problem for us.
Sure. Well, on that note, actually, we're going to take a short break right now, and we're going to talk about Adrian's talk. And Adrian, what was the talk title that you presented at RSA this year?
It's time to kill the pen test.
Oh boy. And that has been a little controversial, both in our internal mailing lists as well as in our community. So we're going to take a short break, come back, and talk about, is penetration testing dead? Long live penetration testing. Stay tuned.